Konnichiwa, my brilliant, slightly too online friend. Welcome back to the Deep Dive podcast, the show where we bravely explore big ideas, complicated histories, and occasionally our own questionable life choices. Today we're looking at Thomas Sowell, which means we're in for wisdom, history, and a level of intellectual clarity my brain usually can't handle without snacks. So settle in, grab a cup of coffee, tea, or, whatever you tell your doctor you don't drink. Let's dive in, head first like an Olympic swimmer with very bad judgment. So the video of honor today is Thomas Sowell, a free man, uncommon knowledge. Ah yes, the show where Peter Robinson interviews brilliant people while politely smiling like a man who knows he's the only one in the room without a PhD. This time he sits down with Thomas Sowell, economist, historian, life experience collector, and all-around I have lived 10 lifetimes and still have time to roast you with perfect logic kind of guy. The interview covers Sowell's early life, born in the Jim Crow South, raised in Harlem, served in the military, and then somehow fought his way through Harvard, Columbia, and the University of Chicago where he studied under Milton freaking Friedman. Like, come on. Some people collect Pokemon, Sowell collected elite institutions. And then he ends up at the Hoover Institution, where he becomes the academic equivalent of Mount Fuji, quiet, majestic, occasionally erupting with truths people pretend not to hear. The whole interview is inspiring, thoughtful, and at moments so honest it makes you say, oof, that one hurt, but thank you, sensei.
Okay, so let's kick things off with this quote, because honestly, it tells you almost everything you need to know about him. Looking back on a childhood that by any standard today was just deeply impoverished, Sowell says it never even occurred to him. Just let that sink in for a second. This really sets the stage for the whole story. A life that was never really defined by its circumstances, but by perspective, by sheer resilience, and just this unshakable sense of self. So let's start at the very beginning. His journey is one that millions of other African Americans took during the Great Migration, leaving the Jim Crow South for what they hoped was the promise of the North. But as you're about to see, for Sowell, this was so much more than moving to a new city. It was, in his own words, like an immigrant's journey. I mean, just look at these facts. They are stark. We're talking no electricity, no hot running water, a tiny wooden house on an unpaved street. And yet, Sowell would look back on these years as some of the happiest of his entire life. So why? It really boiled down to one thing. In his words, he was adored. He remembered a relative telling him, "Tommy, nobody knows when you learn to walk. Somebody was always carrying you."
And this right here? This is the foundation. When the family moved up to Harlem, they knew it opened up a world of opportunity they themselves never had. They couldn't help him with his homework, but their message to him was just relentless. You have to make the most of this. Get this, there was a massive celebration in the family when he was promoted to the 7th grade. Why? Because in that single moment, he had officially gone further in school than any of them had ever been able to.
And then this happens, a truly pivotal moment. A neighborhood friend takes him to the public library for the first time. And Sowell was just confused. He'd never seen so many books in one place, and he knew for a fact he couldn't afford a single one of them. But once his friend explained how a library card worked, well, everything changed. He was new to the city, didn't have any friends yet, and so books became his companions. They became his greatest teachers. But that foundation of self-education, of learning from books, it was about to be tested. Seriously tested. This wasn't some easy path. After leaving home as a teenager, Sowell entered what you can really only call his wilderness years, this period of intense struggle where he had to rely on absolutely no one but himself. This timeline just lays it all out, doesn't it? He drops out of Stuyvesant, one of New York's absolute best high schools, leaves home, and just bounces between these menial jobs. Then a recession hits, and he's unemployed for long stretches at a time. This is a period that truly tests his mettle before he's even out of his teens, and it all leads up to him being inducted into the Marine Corps. During the absolute worst of it, this single number defined his entire existence. 15 cents a day. That was his entire food budget. It would buy him a 5-cent loaf of day-old bread and a 10-cent jar of jelly. That and water from the tap was all he had. I mean, can you even imagine? It taught him a frugality so deep that years later, as a Marine, his buddies would joke about Diamond Jim Sowell taking forever to spend a single quarter. Okay, quick intermission before my brain tries to major in economics. If you're enjoying this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, or tell your friends you listen to a podcast hosted by someone who is basically a confused anime character with a microphone. Your review helps the algorithm, and the algorithm, like some ancient Shinto forest spirit, it requires offerings, so feed it stars. Feed it comments. Keep it happy so it doesn't curse my upload schedule. All right, back to it. So even in this extreme poverty, What does he spend his money on? Books. He manages to scrape together just over $1, which must have felt like a fortune, for a set of encyclopedias. And this is where he first discovers Karl Marx. You know, in the face of his own grim reality, Marxism seemed to offer this powerful explanation for the way the world worked. It was an idea he would hold on to for the next 10 years. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating parts of his entire story, his intellectual journey. So he'd been a committed Marxist for a decade. But it wasn't a book and it wasn't some charismatic professor that changed his mind. No, it was a single direct collision with the real world that just completely shattered his entire worldview. So here's what happened. Get this. As a summer intern at the Department of Labor, he was a firm believer in the minimum wage. He gets tasked with studying its effects in Puerto Rico. Now, the official story was that any unemployment was caused by storms that damaged the sugar crop. So Sowell, being Sowell, just asks a simple, logical question. Why don't we get the data on the sugar standing before the storms hit? And the reaction in the room wasn't applause. It was horror. And in that one moment, he realized their goal wasn't to find the truth. Their goal was to protect the very program that justified their own jobs.
And that single experience, it solidified the principle that would guide his entire life's work: empiricism. This belief that facts, that evidence, that direct experience has to come before elegant theories and high-sounding intentions. He saw with his own two eyes that a government program, designed with the best of intentions, could cause real, actual harm, and that the agency in charge had a powerful self-interest in just looking the other way.
So when you map out the path, the whole intellectual reversal makes perfect sense. He starts with a theory that seems to explain his life. He goes and studies economics at the University of Chicago, so he gets the tools for rigorous analysis. He goes to work for the government and puts the theory to a real-world test. And when the evidence comes back, it completely blows up everything he believed. So what does he do? He follows the evidence. Simple as that.
Next up, let's talk about his time as a teacher. Now, Sowell loved teaching. He really felt a genuine connection with his students. But his career in academia was basically defined by a series of intense clashes over one single principle he refused to ever compromise on: academic excellence.
And this quote, wow, it just perfectly captures the essence of those battles. At Howard University, an administrator literally told him to lower his standards, basically saying that Black students couldn't handle the rigor. This was a direct assault on everything Sowell believed about human potential. He was being told, flat out, to expect less from his students just because of their background. And his response was just immediate and absolute. He believed in his students, and he saw this administrative meddling as the real obstacle to their success. He made it crystal clear. He would rather quit a job he loved than betray his students by lowering his expectations for them. And this exact same pattern would repeat itself at multiple universities he taught at. So all of these experiences and fights, they lead us to the final chapter of his formation. After years of battling it out in academia, he finally found an intellectual home that would allow him to become the prolific, powerhouse writer that we know today. So let's distill the core lessons from this incredible journey.
Then, in 1980, it's like everything just clicks into place. He joins the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. And this position freed him from all the academic politics, all the teaching obligations, and it allowed him to focus solely on what he did best: research and writing. This is really where the formative years end, and the Thomas Sowell we know and read today truly begins his life's work. And man, what a life's work it has been. The sheer volume of his output is just staggering. We're talking dozens of books, many of them written after he turned 80, and hundreds upon hundreds of columns. That work ethic that was forged in those early years of struggle was now fully unleashed on the world of ideas.
So, when you boil it all down, what are the key lessons from a life like this? Look, very few of us are ever going to have his sheer intellect, but we can all aspire to his character, to reject victimhood and take ownership of our lives, to learn to think for ourselves, especially when it's unpopular, to challenge nonsense, no matter how well-intentioned it might sound, to always, always insist on evidence, and to display gratitude for the opportunities we have. Which leaves us with this final question. Through poverty, through hardship, through all these intellectual battles, Thomas Sowell never swayed. He never bent to the climate of opinion. He really stands as a testament to the power of a mind that just insists on its own freedom. And his life kind of asks us, what would it take for us to do the same? All right, that wraps up our mini journey into the life of Thomas Sowell, a man who traveled from the Jim Crow South to intellectual Olympus, armed with nothing but grit, brilliance, and probably a very judgmental stare. Huge shout out to our producer, the legendary FireflyHaku, the Thomas Sowell of editing. If Sowell mastered economics, FireflyHaku mastered deleting my mistakes before anyone notices. Truly a free man, except for my deadlines. Gomane. Thank you, Yadi Yadi, and thank you to everyone listening. You keep this podcast going, you keep me caffeinated, and you keep my confidence just high enough to think I can explain history without setting something on fire. Until next time, stay curious, stay nerdy, and stay free, my friend. Mata ne.